Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Susan Clark. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Environment and Sustainability at UB, the University of Buffalo, and I'll be facilitating this session. So there's just a few logistical items I wanted to tell you about before we begin and before I introduce our speaker. Just so you're aware, this session is being recorded. And the recording will eventually be shared on the ISSST YouTube channel, so just be aware of that. If you have a question, especially during the more formal presentation, please type it in the chat box and send it privately to the host, which is the ISSST network. And I'll be keeping track of the questions that come in, and I can help facilitate those questions to the speaker at the end of the presentation. And while the presentation is happening, we just ask that everyone remain muted. And when we get to the parts of the session, later on in the session, where it's a little bit more, we're asking for your participation, you'll be able to unmute yourself and speak as you wish. And in this session, because it's small, if you'd like to turn on your camera and show your beautiful face, please do. And if not, that's okay as well. So the only other thing is I thought I'd just go through the agenda for today's session. So it will be about an hour long, a 60-minute session. The first 20 minutes or so will be the more formal presentation. And then we're going to pause to take some questions, any clarification questions or anything the audience has. Dawn can address those. And in the second half of the session, it's going to be a little bit more of a conversation or a discussion. And Dawn wants to walk through 3 learning processes one by one and ask your critique and for your comments about each one. So I'll introduce our speaker. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you today Donald Sweet. I want to make sure there he is, making sure he's still there. Good. He's the CEO of Sustainable Intelligence, LLC. And since 2011, Don has dedicated his energies to develop an approach to transform pre-K through 12 community and corporate education and training systems. This applies science and engineering to focus on for sustainability. It uses school gardens, food chain systems analysis, and entrepreneurship as real-world pedagogies to learn and apply all academic subjects to embody organizing principles of sustainability and systems thinking, and to practice creating new knowledge and solutions that add value to life. This approach also inculcates metaphors for human sustainability and the associated system concepts of uncertainty, risk, feedback loops, nutrition, life cycles, and predator-prey relationships. And with that, Don, I want to hand over the presentation to you, and thank you.
Thanks, Susan. So what I wanted, yeah, okay. What I was interested in doing was trying to create a different educational paradigm in order to address things like sustainability, and one where the students drive their own acquisition of embodied cognition in their agencies, and one in which we explore how their intention mediates their attention, which is a relatively new aspect of the theory of action and the theory of agency as well. So we'll talk specifically about 3 aspects of the education: STEM, sustainability, and entrepreneurship. And we'll be looking at the seeker's system, which was developed originally, or started to be developed, to solve a business problem. Back in 2008, when we had the financial meltdown, the SEC was looking to measure corporate sustainability. So my company was developing a dashboard system with sustainability metrics and analytics that would be accessible to 100% of the employees, since system sustainability is the whole system, not just a few folks at the top. The barrier, though, was that CEOs weren't convinced that their employees would be able to understand it because it was difficult. So I said, okay, I'm going to set out to prove that 6th grade students can understand it and teach it. And that was what I was headed toward when I partnershiped with Rochester Roots. This was a pre-K 6 school program, community gardening, being led by Jan McDonald. It started with age 3, where students were following their curiosity and developing their sensory motor skills. And basically, at that age, they're trying to figure out the world that they were born into. As they reach out with their arms and all their senses, they're experiencing the complex adaptive system that we're all in, and developing skills around understanding things like that plants need water, sun, soil. They're really beginning system thinking, and they were just naturally embracing the uncertainty to find the new knowledge. And they were using STEM skills. This is at 3 years old. They had hand lenses, they had microscopes, horticulture equipment. But what threaded throughout the whole thing was processes. So at the same time, they were experiencing entrepreneurship, both from nature's experience of niche formation and defense, and human entrepreneurship, because they were using the school garden project products as resources for paper making and skin salve and lip balm. We were fortunate that one of the schools that they were involved in was Montessori, and Monica Sullivan-Smith, who was actually certified by the one of the nephews of Maria Montessori, spent a lot of time explaining the holistic human development perspectives, the centrality of sensory motor development to agency, trust in the child to lead their own education, with 21 learning tendencies that drive their curiosity in learning. And these actually relate quite closely to the neuroscience of concept primitives. So when a child is born, there's already some software there. You have an operating system that you can build your concepts on, the same as you can load a computer application onto a computer. And going out was a major part of their learning through Montessori, where they would go out into the community, which we built upon to help students develop their networks. We also learned that they're little learning machines, basically absorbing everything like sponges. So the whole idea of our concept that children could understand and then teach really fit with the Montessori philosophy, that they can have their own agency to learn. And it gave us the confidence in the children. At 3 years old, they could do rudimentary systems model. If they went to a farm and when they came back and we said, okay, what were the social, ecological, and technical systems that you saw? They can identify the social system as mom making an apple pie, or the ecology system of the soil, or the technical system of the tractor. These are children at 3 years old. Now they don't know how to write the words, but they can do pictures and assemble them on a diagram. And they were also experiencing a foundation of agency, which is they were setting their own personal expectations, goals, and performance measures. Now this seems pretty big for a 3-year-old. And if you use those words, they wouldn't have a clue what you were talking about. But they were they did have an expectation that the seed would turn into a plant, and they did have the goal that it would survive. And their performance measure was that someday they'd be able to eat it. And it's important because in the learning of concepts, experience them first is almost a necessary element before you can begin to have them taught. By grade 6, they were absorbing these concepts of sustainability, understanding them, and building entrepreneurship businesses. In some cases, that actually had sales. Some of the feedback we were getting was like Tom Seeger was the first to recognize the knowledge creation agencies that our pedagogy was developing. And he and his PhD students would come out and work with the students. In the materials that we sent out was the link to Subhas Ray, who gave the challenge at the Engineers for a Sustainable World Conference. And the chairman's comment was, these children are better sustainability thinkers than 50% of the attendees. And the attendees were basically sustainability entrepreneurs. I mean, undergraduate, graduate, and PhD sustainability. I also sent a link to the posters. These were intended to kind of follow the way that a PhD poster would be. And they present them at a Socratic forum for entrepreneurs, where they have industry and expert judges that actually have us engage Socratically with the students to help them develop their ideas further. Engineering students at RIT and professors that worked with us, their comment was the words that they'd had this educational opportunity when they were this age, and they would have been a lot further along. The other thing is using the agricultural food chain as a pedagogy. It provides the organizational principles, concept of sustainability, and the metaphors for improving human well-being that are also inculcated along with the associated concepts of risk, uncertainty, complexity, life cycles. Concepts that are very hard to teach unless you actually experience them. And by taking responsibility for growing a plant at age 3, they were acquiring personal aspects of real world agency and experiencing the values and the consequent based trade-offs of decision making. This is something that the current education system takes away from students because expectations, goals, and measures are provided for them. However, it's the process of decision making that actually changes the paradigm. And hence the byline of my company, Sustainable Intelligence, is making the world sustainable one decision at a time. Now, in the Seekers system, it's designed to support the students acquiring their own generic agencies for knowledge creation, innovation, and entrepreneurs. And they serve 2 purposes. It supports the flow of knowledge building for co-learning students and their teachers and the entrepreneurs themselves. And in our format, the teachers are learning along with the students. They also improve the resilience of these education as a human cognitive infrastructure for sustainability. Some of the features are one-click access to X and Y grid frameworks, applicable for ages 3 through retirement, teachers, community members, and businesses. It enables a flipped classroom. It's politically and socially and racial agnostic, and it supports continuous improvement and scaling of the program. So next is a picture of what the workspace looks like. So along the top is the process framework, which can be any process or project, and it's the individual steps that they go through. Down the The left side is the inquiry framework, which is the methods by which they create new knowledge at each individual step of the process. So what they will do is say, well, I'm going to work here, and then I'm going to explore it from this perspective over here. When they click on that, and these are filled in with real things at the time, up comes emerging curriculum that explains the curriculum for that point, and also brings a Socratic question. The reason for the Socratic question is two things. One, teachers have been taught to transfer knowledge rather than create it. So it's very difficult for a teacher to ask a Socratic question without somehow trying to give away the answer as if there was a right or wrong answer. They also you want to ask the question in such a way that it invites transdisciplinary knowledge to be involved. Critical thinking for sustainability is cross-disciplinary, but traditional academic critical thinking is discipline specific. If you're a critical thinker in math, that's different than in English or biology or something else, but sustainability, it's across. So the framework allows all of the resources that they need to access to be available within one click away. Different learning processes that they can manage. On the right are the research processes, and they're able within the system to build their own research library if they want to as they get to higher levels, and the analysis and the analytics. So what I'm going to try and do now is go to, okay. So the system's online. So right now we're in the student space, and they get to choose what process framework they want. This happens to be making a raised bed, which they do early on. But it could be an entrepreneurship development. It could be one of a lot of them. They also get to decide what inquiry framework they want to use as they're doing the project. In this case, we happen to have next-gen science standards. But they can be, again, one of many different frameworks. And they can change these inquiry frameworks as they're progressing. Once they've done that, now they've framed at least their starting position. And here you see the actual framework. Across the top is entrepreneur development. And the first step is identifying the need and the business idea. Then they form the business, then they develop the product. As they're doing this, say, forming the business, they may decide that they need to do some model-based inquiry to understand the system they're trying to impact. So they'll move down and click. And when they do, they can enter at that intersection, they can enter the workspace and do one of several things. Ultimately, they create an artifact. And at every step, and this can be as many as 45 different steps, these can be iterative, they go back. They create an artifact that's assessed real time. And the rubrics are transparent. So in this particular case, they got a product activity, which is model-based inquiry. They're going to build a sets influence model. Relative to next-gen science, they're going to be looking at patterns. And then throughout, there's a placeholder for putting in whatever kind of curriculum or a teacher can use this and populate the framework however they like. One of our people we're working right now, and I'm doing a paper with, just won the top award as a US STEM science teacher, presidential award. And the Socratic question is there. they get to define the level of priority that their inquiry is going to take, and they get to define the proficiency level. Are they a beginner or have they gotten the way to mastery? They can also look at the rubrics that are assigned or associated with each level of mastery or inquiry level. This can also be oriented according to the curriculum transfer of knowledge, or what did I just do? Okay, or new knowledge. So at each one of these steps, first is a traditional transfer of the concept that they need. Say they're going to do a model. They need to understand what a modeling is. Once they have that, then they create their own model, and in doing so, are bringing together new information, gathering tacit knowledge that they may have, others may have, and making it explicit. So what I will do now is go back to the PowerPoint. All right. So at this point, Susan, I'm at the point now where I want to start looking at getting input around 3 aspects of the system. And what I'd like to do is to have participants look into their experience or something they may be working on now that they'd like to bring into reality. And the question going forward is based on your idea. It says my here, but that means you. Will this real-time feature for creating new knowledge help me do that? And how could the feature be improved? So as we go through it, we'll work a little so you get a feel for that. In fact, I think I'm going to change the order here a little bit. There are 3 types of learning processes: co-evolving learning processes, adaptive and reflective learning processes, and outcomes-focused learning processes. So we'll go through each of these individually. The co-evolving learning processes build on what you just saw, where you've got the project-based learning or entrepreneurship-based learning, and then you've got the inquiry down the left-hand side. What that's trying to do is instantiate transdisciplinary action research for perceiving complex adaptive systems, identifying their challenges, co-creating new knowledge, and innovating solutions. All become embodied cognition through design thinking and implementing the entrepreneurial products or services or businesses. So I hope I've explained that in a way that's clear. If not, you can send a note to Susan, and I'll try to take it a little further.
If maybe this is a good point just to pause for a second, and if any of the participants have clarifying questions or comments, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can also use the chat box and you can send messages directly to the host, and we can convey those questions that way as well. There's nothing in the chat box right now, Don, so.
Okay.
But maybe while we're waiting, and if others are kind of, maybe they're thinking through what they want to ask, maybe it would be great to walk through one of the examples you were telling me about earlier. That's
Okay.
specifically about the co-evolving learning process that might help folks.
Sure. So as, say somebody's building their business, they're constantly having to create new knowledge. Otherwise, they're not going to end up with a product that's going to be viable in the market from a whole system standpoint. So let's say their first look at modeling is the easiest one to explain. So if people say, okay, I don't understand this system fully that I'm trying to affect. What I'll start to do is to build a model. So when they click on modeling, they can decide how sophisticated they want to do it. They can do it as the simple 3-system model. Our students actually then go to dynamic system modeling, where they project in their own mind for years 1, 3, 5, 10, and 15, how their business will impact 7 different well-being indices. These indices being finance, employment, education, health, sense of community, ecosystem, and I hope I got all 7 of them. Anyway, it's a simulation, and with one click, they get the simulation software comes into their system. They fill out their estimates at these point in time, and they then see what's going to happen as a result of their system. Now, I mentioned it's a 2-part process. First, they have to understand modeling. System dynamic modeling, Tom Seeger and one of his PhD students helped us develop a model that was based on sheep, wolves, and grass. And when we were presenting to introduce it to 3rd to 6th graders, it was amazing. They almost instantly understood the interaction of the variables. In other words, as there was less grass and less sheep, there were less wolves. You know, if there were more wolves, then the sheep population went down. And there was graphical analysis as part of the exercise, and the children understood it. When you asked them what they learned when they did it for their own system, we got answers like, oh, well, I need to start in a different place because I'm not going to end up where I wanted to. And it was also surprising how insightful students were, because one of them, their sales went down year 3 or 4. And I said, well, why is that? And they said, well, because I just noticed that as companies progress through the years, they reach a point where all of a sudden their sales go down and they have to do something new to their product in order for it to go back up again. This is a 3rd or 4th grader. I mean, in corporations, there are always hockey sticks. Every year is better. But these kids didn't. They also, in one case, it was gardening where it was small scale farms where community members would build a small farm and then sell it back to the community. And a 3rd grader raised her hand and said, wow, that's a circular economy. I asked her about 3 different ways to see if she knew what she was talking about. And she absolutely did. Our children are mainly from the poor urban communities. And for them, entrepreneurship and economics is very, very important. And when they see community members going and building something like a farm business, then selling it back to the community, that's creating wealth for their community, and they appreciate it. So I don't know if any of you have anything that you're working on, but if a system lets you kind of explore as you're developing it from different aspects in a very fluid process, would that help accelerate or improve the quality of what you were working on? That's really the question that I'm asking.
I think that's very helpful. I'm not seeing anybody jumping in here. But I'll tell you, Donna, it made me think a little bit about, it just beginning stages, a proposal that I'm working on with some colleagues at the University of Buffalo, and it's all about in this resilient space and thinking about how we can learn from COVID-19 and experiences that people had with that, and how we can use that experience to think about ways to make our community more resilient to future crises or disasters. And part of this particular program, it includes a technological aspect to it. So once we sort of identify what some of the real critical needs were, by talking to people, surveys, that kind of thing, the idea then is to work with folks who are in engineering, for example, computer sciences, data sciences, to help come up with some kind of a solution that can address some of these burdens and things that the community is experiencing. So I could imagine something like this perhaps as being a mechanism to just kind of like organize our thinking around whatever this technological innovation is that we come up with, and kind of allow it to maybe us to think a little bit more holistically, or think about the impacts of the intervention as we're developing it in a more organized way than maybe we would have before.
So I can build on that with what we observed with the kids. As part of an education innovation grant proposal, they were interested in the funds of knowledge, which is basically the knowledge that comes from your lived experience. Much of that knowledge is tacit. So when these children choose a project or a business, it's all self-determined, but there's a large amount of that that's built on their tacit knowledge that goes into that process. What I also realized is some of your top researchers, the research that they're driving is also dependent on a lot of their tacit knowledge of what it is they're working on. Because it's that knowledge that really helps connect it to the real world. And that brings up another thing we're doing with the children, which is when they choose their project, we don't judge their project idea as good or bad. We focus on what we call improvable ideas. So as they're pursuing their idea, they're reaching out to college students, their community, asking questions. Their idea is constantly being improved. Through that process, by the end, they have a good business idea. And they haven't had to go through somebody who may not have anywhere near the experience of their community, knowing whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, or judging it. Just looking at it as an improvable idea that everybody starts collectively working on to support the person is a far better way to do it. So as you're looking at your things, Susan, you might want to actually get some people who lived in there and engage them in a way that their funds of, especially of tacit knowledge, is helping drive your project, because they'll see signals even as you're developing solutions that you'll probably find very helpful.
Great, thank you. Should we move on to the next learning process?
So the next is having an adaptive and reflective learning process. And this happens with the emergent curriculum and the Socratic question. As this is intended to support their evolving knowledge building and transdisciplinary thinking, and let it shift as they're shifting. So it nothing has to be predetermined ahead of time as to where it's going to be and what curriculum is going to be needed. It just tries to follow where they're at. And going back to the Montessori philosophy, What we're really allowing is for children to drive the acquisition of their own agencies for constant transdisciplinary knowledge formation. And this is also applicable for the teachers or for communities or for companies, because in the real world, this is what they do to survive. So that's basically what this is intended to be able to do. It also helps with the issue that we had with the CEOs looking at something like this, or with teachers. They don't know anything about sustainability concepts, principles, the language of it. They may have some experiences personally that can connect to it once it's there, but you're not going to expect an elementary school teacher, or even many people haven't spent a lot of time in the area of STEM or sustainability or entrepreneurship, to have the content knowledge to really inform a student. In fact, one of the college students who experienced Subhas in the Engineers for a Sustainable World said, boy, I don't want to be his teachers, because the children can be really challenging when they're looking at it from a systems perspective, and the teacher's looking at it from a siloed disciplinary perspective. So that's why they're really co-learners in this process. And what happens is the teachers get as excited as the children, because it's all new to them too. But it allows them also, by having the emergent curriculum and Socratic question, it offloads the content requirement for the teacher and lets them focus on what they really know, which is how do you facilitate the development of a child. And it's just fun to watch them. They get excited. It brings a joy of learning back into the classroom as it happens. And the teachers start getting their own worm bins, or growing their own things at home as a result of it. So that's what's going on with this. And by making it adaptive, this kind of system should work 10 years from now, because it doesn't have any fixed perspectives, with the exception that it's got to support creating new knowledge, adaptive innovation, and resiliency building. Hopefully I explained that well enough. If anybody's got any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Or if anybody's got any feedback as to how this might have changed the way they learned or experienced learning when they were in school, or some of the participants may be in school.
I'm just pausing, Don, to let folks unmute if they have something they want to add. For me, this type of an approach seems really useful, and maybe others on the call are like me who are teaching courses in sustainability, right, that do draw from many different disciplines. And I think it's very rare that you have an instructor or professor that really has expertise across all of the different, foundational aspects of sustainability. And we do our best to teach the economics of sustainability, even though we're not, an economist, right, for example. So I could see something like this being really attractive, I guess, to instructors who are teaching that way. Now, of course, I teach undergrads or graduate level, right? So it's a very different sort of level of education, but the same way, I think the approach could be really useful for all of those different levels. So maybe if you have any thoughts on how someone like me who's teaching an interdisciplinary course could use this approach, when thinking about designing a class like that.
Well, the first thing, are you talking to the audience or to me?
I was asking you.
So,
Else wants to jump in, that's okay too.
but my initial reaction would be to try and use the flipped classroom aspect of it. And for people who haven't heard of flipped classroom, basically, that's where you get the lecture at home on your PC at your own convenience. And then when you come into the classroom, you indwell around the problems. So if you think of back when you were in 6th grade math class, the teacher would lecture about some math concept, and then you'd go home and try and solve problems. A flipped classroom is the opposite. The teacher gets to prepare their lecture really, really well, record it once, and that's done. And then when the students are in the classroom, the teacher is assisting them in solving the problems. In your case, Sue, I don't think anybody truly understands. They talk about transactional expertise, which I think has a certain level of credibility in terms of being able to work across disciplines and get them engaged in terms of trying to change their agendas to help solve your problem. But in terms of participants really understanding all of those disciplines, or even two, is probably a big challenge. But if they've caught up a little bit in the flipped classroom approach, and then inside the classroom, they're collectively addressing a problem, they get a chance to actually share their tacit knowledge. I mean, your tacit knowledge around your discipline is probably far, far bigger than your explicit knowledge of your discipline. It's what makes sometimes teachers very exciting to be a student of. The ones that are so excited about their discipline that they can't help but to share the tacit aspects of it that's creating their excitement. I'm sure it's not the explicit, well, this is how you do 4 times 4 is 16. So that's, I think, how I might tend to do it. The other concept I would think about is collaboration versus collective. Collaboration, and I read this, or I've seen this from somebody with, it'll take me a second, but it's one of the big non-for-profit foundations. But in collaboration, it tends to be, this is the problem, we're going to solve it this way, and it's more of a, it becomes less of a new knowledge creation process. Whereas collectively approaching it lets everybody try to contribute toward the solution, but in their own way. And this happened when originally, one of the other issues I needed to do for the corporate stuff was define what well-being was. And that's how we came out with the 7 indices. I did a project for almost 2 years with the city of Rochester around urban agriculture and community gardening. And out of that, we got to find what the well-being indices were. But it was a collective effort. And I found that then people went after the project in their own ways to make the overall vision of improving well-being real. Jan McDonald said, wow, I can take the education piece and really expand it, which she did. And working with her, I think she's raised like $2 million for her project. Somebody else worked on the zoning aspects of urban agriculture and community gardening. When in a collective approach, they have the freedom to do that. in a collaborative approach, it tends to close it down. I don't know if I said that in a way that made sense, but that's another thing, another comment I make.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so we have one more, right? We should probably move.
The last one is outcome-focused learning processes. Everybody asks, what are your outcomes? And the real challenge is, are you really outcome-focused? It looks like you're having too much fun in the garden, you know, or in your entrepreneur projects. Well, I would argue that with the approach we're using, it's far more outcomes-focused than normal. And that's because we have real-time assessment with transparent rubric challenges. Generally, assessments are testing at the end, or in terms of standardized testing, you may not get the results back for several months. And the rubrics are anything but transparent. Well, we changed that. We said, well, say in entrepreneurship, they're creating up to 45 artifacts, in some cases iteratively. Well, you can look at that artifact and know what the academic concept was that they needed to know in order to produce that artifact. And you can observe the new knowledge that was created. So that way, the outcomes become relevant because they're in process. And that's like a manufacturing company. They don't wait when they build a car. They don't wait until 6 months afterwards to see if it worked when the customer got it. Every single step in the manufacturing process knows if they're doing it well and how they can improve it. The second thing is that they're getting micro-credentials. These micro-credentials are certain skills, whether they're a specific aspect of a STEM skill, or they can be behavioral badges in terms of, are they really engaged in the learning processes that they're pursuing? And these then get aggregated into e-resume and e-portfolio starting in 3rd grade. So in fact, one of the students said, wow, this is a lot more meaningful, because if a company sees I took a math class, they have no idea what I learned in that math class. But if I show them how I actually use that math to do this, they know what I can do. And he was really excited about that idea. So our outcomes focus transcends just a singular academic discipline. It also allows the continuous improvement, but it also is building the career and life skills and kind of assessing those real time. And that's what we mean by real outcome focused learning processes.
So I'm trying, Don, to distinguish this approach from maybe the more traditional approach that I'm used to, which you still have learning outcomes that you seek from a class or maybe from a larger program. Say, you know, if you're enrolled in a sustainability program, you sort of program level learning outcomes, and then for each particular class, you might have specific learning outcomes. So to me, perhaps this is just a little bit more rapid. So maybe it's just being very transparent and clear at each step of the way, how what you're doing and what you're learning, the activities, how they sort of map to these larger learning outcomes. Is that, or maybe you can help just distinguish.
Oh, sure. I think what I heard you say was you were using the assessment more as an evaluation tool of how effective your teaching was. Did I hear that right?
That's one way you can use it. I mean, a lot of times you develop what these learning outcomes will be when you're designing a class. So you sort of, it helps you to, you know, just think about what those core modules or content and things of your class will be. But it's also something that you often share with your students right at the beginning of the class or at the beginning of a module, so that they, you know, it's very clear what it is they're supposed to be learning from that activity or that assignment.
Okay, so I guess the difference is in perspective, because again, going back to the Montessori philosophy of where young children are driving their own agency, their own development of their sensory motor skills, their own. So when a child is working in an entrepreneurship project, you don't have to motivate them. They are excited. It's their idea. And it's when a child is bringing their own idea or their own vision into reality, that is an authentic experience of agency. You know, it's not somebody saying, "Oh, you're." No, it's theirs, and they made it happen. When they're engaged in that process, it also helps the teacher get over the hump of, like, if the teacher's teaching math, how do they get math to be used in the real world? Generally, they create pseudo real world problems that the children solve. But as Kahn said in his famous book on learning paradigms, it's really the same thing over and over again. Whereas when the student is learning that math associated with a specific thing they need to do to get their business to work, they have a much more intention-mediated attention to learning that. And in fact, if you look at the next, the government has come out with a 5-year strategic plan for STEM skills, which is really, really impressive. It is nothing like the state level science and technology standards. They don't even give the metrics. What they do is talk in terms of the global type of outcomes they're looking for to get a workforce that has these skills, but that everybody in society has these skills, and they will need them in order to survive in a world where knowledge is accumulating at an accelerating rate and becoming more and more technical. I originally got introduced to this with the co-author on the paper I'm doing, who won the presidential award for Teacher of the Year for STEM teaching. In her case, well, one of the things she's using is forensics to teach some of the skills, just because, you know, kids are interested in that a lot. But this idea of real-world application of academic skills has been tough, and it's one that just kind of doesn't come up in this problem, in this situation. In fact, what we try to do, originally what people wanted, a lot of garden-based programs, because you're measuring things and whatnot in there, they were looking at it from the perspective, oh, I'm teaching these things that they're going to be tested on in Common Core or whatever. And we started out a little bit of that too. But when you flip it, instead have teachers working along with children and seeing where a math skill needs to be taught that maybe they weren't planning to teach in order to advance that project. Now there's a much more aliveness to that. And in fact, in the STEM, the new STEM initiatives, math plays a critical role in creating the agency for STEM, much more than you normally imagine. I don't know if
We have a question in the chat.
Sure.
It says, can you give an example of one of the global outcomes in the new government STEM initiatives?
Okay. So it's only been out for a short period of time. So if they're asking for a real world example, I don't have the perspective that they would have on that. what, but what I can say is the outcome as it's impacted me in our program. STEM I looked at up until this came out is not something that was very exciting. I could see where it was necessary, but there wasn't an aliveness to it. When this standard came out, and they kind of framed it as, hey, the world's getting more technical. Everybody needs to understand these skills, but they're going to use them differently. And they will allow us to determine how you, what metrics you use to assess a STEM skill. Now they're trying to coordinate across, I don't know, 10 different government departments, you know, whether it's NSF or education or CDC or the health industry, the health department. So I guess the outcome is that you're going to have more of a collective approach to getting a STEM conversant society than a collaborative approach where everybody focuses on a narrow interpretation of a STEM skill. So that's kind of the difference in outcomes. In our case, it's changed our motivation and where we're pursuing. And I look at it as the sky's the limit, because STEM, it's whatever they need to make their business successful. We had one kid who wanted to do electricity relative to his project because he was going to make a sensor to help his kids, his classmates grow better plants. Well, we teamed him up with a electrical engineering professor at RIT, and we ended up by getting you know, test equipment and that kind of thing to do it. So there's a lot of STEM in that. Another second grader who wasn't even supposed to be in the program because they're supposed to be third, but his older brother and sister were in it, and the parents said, could you come? And he wanted to know in his project what the difference between tapping a pencil on a desk and a piece of paper. Why did it sound different? Think of that as a STEM exercise. Here's somebody who doesn't know charts and graphs. And it took me a long time to find people in the university could actually get this child to catch on to what was really going on, because you have to basically break apart the sound waves into a single wave and see the difference. So it was, that interpretation of STEM is far more exciting.
Yeah. Great. So Don, we've reached the 2 o'clock mark. So I'd suggest if you put the final slide up, yep, with your email, so your contact information is there. And if there's anything else you want to quickly add at the end here.
Nope. Thanks for, you know, listening and participating. And if you know some community or business or school would like to kind of pursue this, let us know. And if you have a question or just are interested, then send me an email and we'll start a dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Don, and thanks everyone for joining us. And I hope you join another ISSST session. Thanks.